Hello everyone and welcome to the Constructive Criticism Network. This network is here to help you improve at Magic the Gathering at every level. From Pauper Leagues to Top 1000 Mythic, we've got you covered. If you want to hear the entire network, head on over to our sponsor at PureMTGO.com, where you can hear each and every show, each and every week, and check out their sponsor, MTGO Traders, and tell them that the CCMTG Network sent you. Now sit back, enjoy the show. From YouTube, podcasts, and more, here's this week's episode from ConstructedCriticism.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 316th episode of Constructed Criticism. I'm your host, Mason, and I'm joined by my co-host, Matt Kling.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going well. I've had an adventurous last 2 weeks. We missed the episode last week. Technically, we did it. It just, while there was good stuff in it, it just kind of wasn't ready for public consumption. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I definitely know what you mean. I was there for it.
Yeah. You and I are really the only people that know what I mean. There was some great. It was one of those things where, like, if I could YouTube highlight clip it, maybe that'd be the way to do it. But as an episode, it doesn't really stand on its own for a couple of reasons, and we'll try to get back to that topic someday.
Yep. I do think it was a good topic. It was just a little scattered in our presentation. So
yeah, and there were a lot of factors playing into that. Not the least of which was the fact that it's a hard thing to talk about, and I think it's something that maybe we need to flesh out beforehand more.
Yeah,
so,
I agree.
Yep. Well, either way, that doesn't matter. That episode's gone for the lost time. This is the new 316th episode, and we are gonna kind of talk about all the formats. But Matt, before we do that, we gotta talk about always improving. So Matt, how did you improve this week?
Well, similar. I think I talked about some stuff related to this a few weeks ago, but I've been working on coaching still. And what's interesting is I think this week, the coaching session that I did actually helped me quite a bit, because there are a lot of things that we do as very experienced Magic players that we kind of take for granted, and then having to go back and explain something makes you have to not necessarily relearn it, but sort of go through it and understand why you do these things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was pretty helpful. For instance, the person that I was coaching wanted to get some experience in control mirrors. Okay. And there are a lot of things that I do in control mirrors that I don't think about, and then having to justify why I do these things has been interesting. It's sort of similar to the first time that I started playing Magic with somebody else, on Skype or whatever, where we're both playing the same deck.
Mm-hmm.
Just having to go through your thought processes is very helpful.
Yeah, I think that's something that I was doing last night with Drake. We were practicing Amulet Titan, and we were playing a league, and it was why are we doing this? Why are you grabbing this thing? It's we're doing this for that reason. And there were other times where it's I don't know, and then I have to think about it and internalize my thoughts and then verbalize them, and then sometimes it just wasn't right. So it's oh no, that I'm just dumb. We're supposed to do this.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's a big thing. That it's hard. It's not easy to talk about, at least for me personally, it's hard to easily verbalize why I made the plays I did quickly and efficiently to other people. I have a hard time with that, and it's probably not the best skill in the world to be bad at, especially if you're doing a Magic podcast. But
I think that it really comes back to a greater theme that I've been trending on a lot this year,
mm-hmm.
which is self-evaluation. Being able to define, not only your skills and weaknesses, but why you do the things that you do is really important.
Yeah, I think it's very, very crucial to be able to have that kind of reflection inward. And so I'm glad to hear you not only exploring that, but I think when you hit those parts that are hard, those are the level up moments. Those are the bosses where you're having a hard time verbalizing that thing, and you have to dig deeper. You normally come out with more. So that's awesome. Yeah. I'm glad that's going well for you. And you're liking the coaching, by the way, just for people out there maybe interested in coaching. Is this something you think you might pursue more?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that I don't know that I'm good at yet, but I'm certainly working hard at it. And obviously, I think I have a pretty reasonable Magic knowledge pool, but
sure. I guess my question,
learning how to teach is a different skill.
Yeah, learning how to teach is very important. I also think teaching, there's different types of teachers and teaching, and you're going to line up better with different people. But what I care more about, and I'm kind of asking is, are you enjoying it?
Yeah.
Awesome.
I've been enjoying it.
That's good. Yeah, I wasn't sure when you got into it if you would enjoy coaching. That was one of the things that I was kind of more in the back of my mind, like, I wonder how he's going to feel about that. So that's good. That's good to hear.
Yeah, I was actually trying to answer the question that you asked. I don't generally enjoy things that I'm bad at, so,
Sure. Sure. So there's like an implied answer there when you told me that.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. Gotcha. Okay. Well, I'm big dumb, so you gotta spell things out for me. Well, my always improving moment was making sure to like do the work and actually sit down for Modern, because so it's kind of weird. I'm gonna kind of talk about it. So since the last episode y'all heard, I like did very well in an open, got 14th. I won a PTQ last weekend, and then I won an IQ, and so I've been doing a lot of Magic. And it was very tempting to just not practice Amulet and not talk about Amulet, because I've played so much Amulet over the last year and some change. And I was just like, I got Dilks, and Dilks is doing a lot of work with Edgar and Daryl and all of them and Keith, and there's a lot of information about Amulet, and I kind of know how to play it. So I'm just going to take the aggregate deck, play that, and do well. Not do well, but attempt to do well like with that. Like I don't need to put in. I felt like I maybe don't need to put in all the extra hours. And what I realized is that, well, the deck is probably it seems to be easier to play now after playing that. I can say it's much easier to play. At the time, it seemed to be easier, but I didn't want to be caught off guard having not played with the Dryad package at all going into regionals. So, and I wanted to make sure that I was, not some, for lack of a better word, crazy person when it came to my thoughts and stuff. So I got to sit down, talk to Drake last night, play a league with him, and Drake's not an Amulet master or anything like that, but we can still kind of figure some stuff out. And that was, it was important because I think it's very easy when you like have a couple of good results to rest on your laurels a little bit. And I was happy that I wasn't doing that. So
yeah, definitely, that's a good thing. Especially when the deck is like adapting as much as it has been, right? Even if it gets easier, it's still going to be different.
Yeah, it's much different. In fact, it kind of came up where like the fact that now it's stock to have 2 T-Wests, I had a kind of a tendency to always lean towards second Titan over a Pact Negation before. And it's just like, well, the next Titan always gets the Pact anyways. So I'll force them to answer this Titan in a lot of spots. And then last night it's like, well, not only does that not work because I only have 2 T-Wests, but I need to get this Dryad a lot now. So I need to, position things differently and play the game differently sometimes. So it was very helpful for that. And also like the picking up a bounce land and holding the bounce land in Amulet, it was always pretty important. But it got to a certain point where you kind of left it there after a while. And then Field of the Dead kind of made it so you had to evaluate that more. And then now Dryad's made it where it's like, okay, you really need to hold on to that bounce land as long as you possibly can. And be picking it back up again because it is worth so much now.
Sure, yeah, you get Valakut triggers and Field of the Dead triggers.
Yeah, you get Valakut and Field of the Dead and a bunch of mana.
It's kind of interesting, though. I could see that going the other way as well because of Field of the Dead, like where you are more inclined to have it in play since having 7 different lands is actually important. Like,
yeah. Well, so that's where it's awkward, too, is having to adapt, like, am I Field of the Deading or am I Valakuting? Or am I setting up? And we pivoted. We thought zombies were going to matter, and we realized, oh, no, like, the 2 zombies we originally got were all we needed. And then like we should have been playing towards Valakuting. Instead we did like Field of the Dead stuff. And so yeah. But yeah, no, it was just good. And also, since it is the always improving section, it felt good to qualify for my first players tour.
Yeah, congrats.
Thank you. Yeah. I started on that goal like I guess 3 years ago now. Maybe a little longer than that. When did Amonkhet come out? Because that's when I started grinding. But whenever that was, that's when I started grinding. So then to finally get there. Nice.
I mean, I feel like my congratulations might have been a little, lackluster, but it's mostly just because I feel like you've, already deserved it. Like in my mind, you were already a Pro Tour competitor. So
sure, thank you. Oh, also, like it happened like 5 days ago, and like we already had a whole conversation about it. So and this is the first time I was talking to it. Then maybe, but yeah, no, it's all good. Also, like I don't know. It was weird where I was definitely super happy, and in the finals I put against my friend James Hess, who actually joked when we got there like at 10 and the event started at 12, but we both thought it started at 11. It turns out they didn't open until 11:30. So it's kind of like this whole like, oh no, like I got all this time to kill. And so I sat in his car and he joked like, this is the finals, And then I had sent him a message on Monday saying I'm going to beat you in the finals, and then I beat him in the finals. And so it was a fortuitous event, and yeah, it was something else to go undefeated dropping. I only dropped like one game, and yeah, I don't know. I walked in and felt like, oh my gosh, everyone's playing Blue White Control. I'm playing Bant Ramp. This is the tournament, you know?
Right.
So yeah, I don't know. It was great, and I'm excited, really excited for the Players Tour. I'm gonna get to work with some friends, and it's weird because like I've worked with friends before, like I have talked to Michael before, you know, when he's doing, or you or Jess or something like that. But now like me and Jess get to work together, and like I am just as committed. And before there were times where it's like I felt like I really want to take a break. But I'm like, no, I want to help my friends. You know, I can't take a break right now. And now I think it's going to be a different dynamic, which I'm really excited for. So.
Yeah, I mean, no matter how much you like your friends, it's always a different dynamic when you're testing for yourself.
Yeah, exactly. So super excited for that. That was my, I guess, like 2 minutes of getting to talk about myself. Kling, are you ready to talk about the Patreon question coming back?
Yeah.
Awesome.
It was a really great section, so I'm glad to see it coming back.
Awesome. Now that we've done that, we don't have any. No, I'm just kidding. We do have a question this week, and it is from Robert Woodliff. Robert says, I don't get to play a lot of Magic, and thus when I lose, the salt kind of affects me more. How do I kind of work on that? And
was it that I don't get to play a lot of Magic, or was it that I don't tilt a lot in Magic?
I don't get salty a lot, and thus when I do, I don't feel it affects my gameplay optimally or quite significantly. And I took that as an excerpt from a whole other thing where he asked on a different thread, and in that I believe he mentioned how he didn't talk as much. So I kind of abridged it there.
Okay.
But basically, it seems like the crux of it is he doesn't get salty a lot, but when Robert does, it really gets to him.
Right.
And so, what is that something that affects you, Kling, before we go forward? Like, because I feel like you and I are very much in Robert's camp where we don't get salty a lot.
Right. I think that, I mean, there's the reality of it is everybody's going to get tilted to a point to where they're not going to make optimal plays. Minimizing that is really important, though.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't think it's possible to care about something and then not sometimes get tilted to a point where you're doing things kind of poorly.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's important to not only like accept that it's good that you're getting emotional at times, but it's unreasonable to be hard on yourself when you get that emotional. Now, I think it's important to like do your best to push it aside, you know, and like the thing I always told my friends, you know, so that I have like issues with salt is like you have 44 minutes left to play the rest of your game of Magic, right? But you have the rest of your life to be upset about that. So if you're going to be upset, just wait a little bit, you know? Right. You got to finish this match first.
Yeah, so. There are also a lot of other techniques. Like if you're salty in the middle of a match, you can also take a break. Like if you call a judge over for a restroom break or whatever, you know, maybe splash some water on your face, that kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah, I've never done that, but that seems totally reasonable now that you've said it. It's never occurred to me to do that. But yeah, that there you go. That says tips and tricks. You know, number 4, blow your mind. But yeah, I think when you're in those kind of situations, you have to, for lack of a better word, suppress your emotions. It's okay to understand that like your emotions are there and to work through them, but like you're going to get upset, just like Kling said. You're not a robot, and if you are a robot and you're not feeling emotional at times, and there's different degrees to this too, of course, but like if you never get emotional about it, then maybe there's other things that are going on that are making Magic harder, right? And there are definitely times where like things don't really affect me. Like I get upset every now and again, but like it's really hard for it to happen, and when it does happen, it hits a lot. But I think that's good that it does hit sometimes because it shows how much that I care and that I'm trying. Not to say that people it doesn't affect that way aren't trying, just that I think sometimes people shut down so much in the attempts of not having that affect them that they get less invested. You know what I mean? Am I talking crazy talk?
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. Like everything's kind of relative, right? Like without the lows, you don't get the highs either.
Yeah, exactly.
So, you know.
Yeah.
You don't want to turn your emotions off completely, I don't think.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's a hard thing, and it's something that you're gonna have to figure out a lot about yourself too. You know.
Yeah, I don't know that people that get salty more often necessarily have it impact them less, though. That's
Yeah, well, I definitely don't think that's true, because I feel like a lot of people who are salty, they kind of like live in it, you know, and like it's like a bad habit that like it is a cycle. But I think and maybe I did a poor job there of explaining what I was thinking, but I think the act of having salt happen to you isn't necessarily a bad thing, because it shows that you're still caring and invested and whatnot, and that, you know, you don't want to lose that passion and that drive, because I think that passion for the game is what helps push a lot of people forward. So I'm hesitant to lose that, and I think passion is also what gets the salt. So.
Absolutely agree. What I was actually drawing back to the original question which was prefaced with, I don't get salty a lot, and thus when I do it, I feel like it affects my optimal play quite significantly.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that implies that people that are salty more often might be less affected by it because they're used to it and like overcome it.
Gotcha. Yeah.
I don't think that playing through salt is necessarily a skill that you need repetition to work through. I mean, maybe in a long enough timeline, but it seems to me that people that are salty often are at least as salty, and their play is affected. And not only that, but their whole approach in practice is affected by being salty. Like, if you constantly are walking out of a match and thinking that your opponent got lucky, then you're not going to learn anything from that match.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and if you're always beating yourself up for how stupid you are, you never notice like the good things you're doing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it works both ways. Absolutely.
Yep. Well, I hope that was helpful, Robert. If you want to ask a question for the show, you can go to patreon.com/ccmtg, become a patron of the show. We decided to bring it back this week. So this week it was only on the Facebook group, but going forward, I'm going to post it on Patreon, hopefully a week ahead of time. And then we're just going to grab them. They don't have to be exactly Magic related. They can be Magic tangential. And we'll gladly talk about them. And it's just another way to say thank you for the people that help support the show. And another way to help support you for helping support us is go to Oasis Games. And you can use code CCMTG to get 15% off your first order. And code Would That Be Good to get 4% off every order. That's like a, hey, thank you for coming to us. We're going to give you this sick deal. If you're about to buy a Pioneer deck, which I might wait 5 days on if you're listening to this at the time it just came out, you're going to get a sick deal. Basically 20% off is low-key insane. So that's all there is when it comes to that. Kling, are you ready to talk about our main topic today?
Yeah.
We're going to talk about 3 main topics. I hope you're ready for that.
3? That's so many. That's 3 times as many as we usually talk about.
I know. So we're going to kind of talk about each of the major formats, because each format kind of has something coming up in the relatively near future. We have Magic Fest Detroit, I believe, next weekend, as well as SCG Open Baltimore, which will be Pioneer. And then we have the Modern Regionals this weekend. So 3 formats, all with pretty big events coming up. So we're going to kind of talk a little bit about each of them. And we're going to start with my favorite format, and not because I qualified for my first Pro Tour, Standard. Kling, before I jump into this, I am going to talk about the 5 most popular decks on Goldfish when it comes to results, just to kind of give everyone at home a frame of reference for our conversation. So, Mono Red, Azorius Control, Temur Adventures, Bant Midrange, which is kind of really a Bant Ramp deck, but whatever, and then Jeskai Fires are the top 5 decks there. What do you think about Standard?
So the deck that I would play right now in Standard is Bant Mid. My feelings on the format as a whole aren't great, unfortunately.
Sure.
Only because the only reason I say that is because I do think that this Bant mid-range deck right now is the best deck, and
interesting.
The problem that I have with a deck like this being the best deck is that it becomes an arms race very quickly, and it's going to be hard to know when you're the person going just enough over the top and not so far that you're losing to the mono red decks and things like that.
Yeah, that was one of my worries going to the PTQ, was people like Croaky were playing a bunch of Narsets and Agent of Treacheries in their main deck.
Right.
And I was like, well, I need to not die to the decks that are pressuring me, even if they aren't that bountiful in the format. So I played Arboreal Grazer. Now, if you believe Bant midrange to be one of the best decks, or Temur Adventures to be one of the best decks, or Azorius Control, or Jeskai Fires, having Sloth is very bad. That card is not good in those matchups at all. So what do? You go greedier, right? But then your deck becomes clunkier, and it's just the whole cycle. I actually don't like Bant Ramp mid-range right now, actually. I think the deck is the most inherently strong deck with the most powerful, pound-for-pound card. But I think Temur Clover might be the best deck in the format, actually.
Interesting.
Yeah. So my reasoning kind of is that Temur Clover can go over the top of decks like Bant Midrange, given a reasonable enough time, they basically they don't want to see a Nissa on 5 or sooner. So like they don't want to see Growth Spiral or Row into Nissa or a turn 5 Nissa. That the 3/3s actually build up pretty quickly against the Temur Clover deck, and they're able to pressure them there. But if they are given time to cast like an Escape the Wilds before Nissa comes down and use the extra mana or get a Clover, they can overpower the Bant midrange deck. So I feel like Bant midrange and Jeskai Fires are like the tier 0 deck of just like generically powerful cards. And then I think things like Temur Clover and Jund Food are some of the top decks, along with Mono Red and Azorius Control. But I feel like Azorius Control and Mono Red have kind of peaked already, like from the early weeks, and now people are going over the top of them. So they're kind of like safe choices for a GP. They're like a good way to get like an X5, I feel, but they're not a great way to get a better finish. Does that make sense?
It does. My one problem with the Temur Adventures deck is this deck actually doesn't seem that hard to target to me.
Okay.
Like if you just play, like the reason that this deck was always bad in the past was because Questing Beast and the like were rampant, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I've played against this Temur Adventures deck hundreds of times, not for a while yet, but like
it's basically
it's
the
always
same
been
deck from the last format.
completely awful. Like it's just been almost stone cold unplayable. And I think that the main reason for that was like a lot of Gruul Spellbreaker, Questing Beast, to a lesser extent the Shifting Ceratops, that kind of thing. And I don't think that it would be that hard to even in the Bant ramp deck to include enough of those kind of effects in your sideboard to make this matchup just super favorable. Like basically the only way they have to deal with something like that is Lovestruck Beast, right? Like they can Brazen Borrower, but like doesn't really do anything. And like aside from that, you're looking at like Lucky Clover plus plus Bone Crusher Giant to try to take something down.
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes harder and harder when like you have to have 2 cards to answer every one of theirs.
I think that's a reasonable assumption. I also think there are different ways to attack Clover. Like my plan was 4 Gust, 4 Veto out of the board, and to play that sort of game plan. So I do think it's definitely attackable, but I think it is the most medium deck that can go over the other deck. So if you believe there's an arms race, I think Temur Clover is a safe choice to pick.
Sure.
For that reason. I also think Jund Food has kind of circled back around because now that Azorius is down, the Jund decks can actually start targeting these other decks,
Mhm.
and it's actually quite strong. And I've seen some pretty sick innovations. Wildborn Preserver has started popping up as a way to have like a sick mana sink with the cat and go over the top of other things and also be a flash threat against some of these decks. The Check House has done some crazy awesome innovations with the Jund Food deck, and I think it's a reasonable choice as well. What do you feel about Jeskai Fires? Because this is the deck that we always kind of disrespect, and it's so clunky if you don't have Fires, yet it continues to do well. If you're looking at Magic Fit Detroit, and let's say you're not allowed to play Bant midrange because of money, right? Because the Bant midrange is very expensive. In fact, looking at the decks, it is like double the price of basically everything. What do you feel about Fires?
I don't hate Fires. If I had a plan that I was comfortable with against Azorius Control from the sideboard, I think Jeskai Fires is a totally reasonable choice. It probably actually has a reasonably solid matchup against the Bant midrange deck, right? Because you're not really interacting with the Fires deck, and so they will just like combo kill you.
Sort of. I played against Fires a fair bit online and at the PTQ. I played against this insane kid from Texas that like drove. He's like 14. He's been playing since war, and he was insanely good actually for how long he'd been playing. But either way, I've played it on Arena some too, and you have a surprising amount of play thanks to Elspeth Conquers Death, because I think the inherent problems of Jeskai Fire happen where if they don't combo kill you, they just kind of run out of gas, and Elspeth Conquers Death is really punishing against that strategy for the same way it is as Azorius Control. So yeah.
Interesting. I mean, playing Control, like I thought that the Elspeth Conquers Deaths were nice in the matchup, but not like they weren't like the linchpin or anything to the matchup. I mean, most of the matchup I felt like was because you have 7 main deck counterspells or more. Looks like this is playing 9.
Sure. From my opinion is I would counter things early, and then eventually I would stick something like a Dream Trawler, and then they would something would sneak through. And either it snuck through or a Dream Trawler, and then Elspeth Conquers Death was my way to tempo them back out, and then eventually it brings something back, whether it's a little Teferi or a Narset. You just get something back, and then you can also rebuy your Elspeth Conquers Death with Teferi to keep just killing their things if you start running out of counter spells. I don't know. I found that matchup to be basically a buy for Azorius Control, specifically because of Elspeth Conquers Death.
I mean, I also agree that the matchup's good for Azorius Control, but I don't know. I think that was true even before Elspeth Conquers Death was printed, so.
Sure. I don't know if I believe that, but that's neither here. I think the Resolve Permanence was an actual problem before, but that we're doesn't actually matter a whole bunch. I think Jeskai Fires is fine. Have you seen the Sultai mid-range deck before we move on? This is kind of the last deck that's been popping up recently.
Yeah, I've seen it. I'm not really sure what my incentive to play this is. I guess Casualties of War is supposed to be pretty good against the Bant deck.
Yeah, I think that's the hope. I think you're too bad against the aggro decks. And they're still, like, some people are still going to play Rakdos Aristocrats, which I think is surprisingly good, considering the cards don't look super strong. I think Mono Red's still a deck that you will see play, and people aren't talking about it, and that's when Mono Red normally does its best. And I think if you're trying to, like, Sultai midrange to go top people, Annex is just going to destroy you. So,
right.
Yep. That's kind of where I'm at with Standard. I don't think Bant Ramp, just to close it up, is a bad choice. I just don't super love it. And in fact, I didn't even super love it going into my PTQ. I just knew it was a generically strong deck and that people probably wouldn't know what I was doing. That I was, like, far enough ahead. So
I think that is. I think you might be underselling how good, nice it is to just be playing mono good cards, though. Like,
that's fair. I mean, just playing powerful cards is really good. I like that plan.
Right.
All right. Well, let's talk about Pioneer, since this is with the Baltimore Open, also a week ahead. The Pioneer metagame looks to be Inverter, Bant Spirits, Mono White Devotion, Sultai Delirium, Mono Black Aggro, and just for the sake of, I want to bring up this fact here. We have Mono Green Walkers, which is the Wish deck, and then Lotus Breach. So Lotus Breach went from the deck that everyone thought was going to destroy the format to, seeing 3.7% of the metagame. Where are you at on Pioneer?
Believe it or not, I would play Mono White Devotion Pioneer right now.
You just every week I get lower on this deck after you try and build me up a little bit, and then you tell me you're like, I would still play this one. We're gonna have the conversation today, so buckle in. Mono White and Devotion, sell me on it.
I think that the Gideon stuff is actually insane against the Inverter decks. Most of the people that I know that have been playing Inverter have been struggling with this matchup, including you. Like, you were planning on playing the Elder Spell in the sideboard, right, for this matchup?
I did play the Elder Spell. It's for this and the Mirror, but yeah.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that people without technology as specific enough as the Elder Spell are going to have a hard time when you have multiple Gideons in play.
Okay.
Anything else? I think that basically as long as you can avoid Sultai Delirium, I like all the other matchups. Like,
that's so crazy. Everyone talks about how Mono White has a good Sultai Delirium matchup.
I mean, it's possible. That's from a completely theoretical standpoint. Sultai Delirium wasn't really
a thing
popular.
You were testing?
Yeah, last time I was testing the deck, and
yeah,
like it looks like it would be Sultai Delirium favored. So if Mono White is favored in that matchup too, then I'm not even sure what your bad matchup is supposed to be.
Sure. So I don't know if it is, because I have not put Inverter down, because I'm positive Inverter is the best deck by such a large margin. Well, by such a small margin, but so flexible that it becomes so large. It's a weird statement, but it's where I'm at with Inverter, and I'll get more into that in a second. But Sultai Delirium players all complain about Mono White, and then Mono White players all love to get paired against Sultai.
Okay.
And so it's just kind of wild to me.
I mean, it's possible depending on how you build your deck, right? Like, they don't really have good ways to kill Heliod.
Yeah.
Arcanist Owl is nice 2-for-1. All the Gideons, honestly, are probably pretty good too.
Elspeth Conquer deck, another nice one there.
Yeah, definitely.
Yep. Yeah,
I guess I could believe it. I mean, it really, there's actually a lot of versatility to the way that you can build these mono white decks too. Like, you can go anywhere from like basically white weenie to like, mono white control. Like,
yeah, some people started playing Gideon's Intervention in the main deck too.
Yeah. Like, I've seen lists with like as many as 3 Elspeth Conquers Deaths in the main, and you're just like, wow, it's like you're just never gonna run out of gas.
Yeah, so I think Mono White Devotion is the second best combo deck to Inverter, and I think like Inverter, it plays these 2 game plans, and people aren't quite. They don't quite have the answers to both game plans, right? It's like hard to stop all the creatures like just attacking and the Gideons turning into these big beefy friends and still stopping the Heliod combo. In the same way, it's hard to stop Inverter from playing this blue-black mid-rangey game and then also being a Splinter Twin of just winning the game outright. I think that puts a lot of pressure on both, and they do it in different ways. I think the difference is that Mono White Devotion is much easier to hit because you're relying so much on creatures, and your cards are so much pound for pound less powerful than the Inverter cards.
So, to that point,
Yep.
I think that it is actually detrimental to Inverter to be so hard to interact with at the lower levels of play.
What do you mean it's detrimental? I'm curious what you mean by that.
Because your opponent is forced to never play around it because they don't have a way to interact with you playing this 4-mana Inverter into a 2-mana Thassa's Oracle. Unless they can interact on the stack, there's no possible way to interact with it.
So the thing is, though, is that what you've said is true, but like if you believe what you said is true about low level play, what happens is they bring in the wrong stuff, and so you get like Rest in Peace did a bunch, or Leylined a bunch, or like I actually have a perfect example from the IQ. I thought erased my opponent, and they had Unmoored Ego in hand, and they had E2 Extinction, Vivian, and lands, and they're on Sultai Delirium on the play, and I have a blue up, and so I decide I have 2 Inverters in hand, a Kalitas and a Jace, that I'm just going to take E2 Extinction, and I'm going to become the blue-green midrange deck, or the blue-black midrange deck from this point, and they're going to Unmoored Ego my Inverters, and it's going to draw me into the kind of the gas I need to keep making plays, and I don't actually care. And what happened is my opponent actually had the read because I took so long to think about it that I had Mystical Dispute, and we played like a kind of a weird game where eventually I tapped out, and then they Unmoored Ego'd me and cycled my cards, but then we just played for a bunch of turns and I decked them. Like, the hate isn't really that good against Inverter in general. So while I think what you said is true, like that you just kind of have to go for it against them and like just kind of attack them with a lot of decks and just, hope to dodge the combo a lot of the times in a weird way, people don't play it out like that because they're like, no, I need to do something to interact, because people don't like it when they feel like they have no agency over the game.
Sure. I agree that they're going to dilute their deck more against Inverter. But the way that they're going to play the game, in theory, I mean, I guess it really depends on how high they value these sideboard cards that don't work. I guess it's possible that they mulligan for them and do other things. Do you know how difficult it is to beat like a white aggressive deck when you're double Stone Rain the entire game?
I mean, a little bit.
You get two free Thalias every game, and you're just like, all right, well.
Sure, that's fair. I mean, that's hard to beat, but also the Inverter decks are like adapting to that. So like now people are starting to play 4 JVP main deck, and then that turns our like Gideon problem on its head a bit, because once you have 4 JVP, if you have like 2 heroes downfall, you have 4 heroes downfall, and you're able to position yourself in such a way normally where you just kind of flip downfall the Gideon and then combo them all in the same turn.
Oh yeah, I wasn't even talking about in the heads up match for what it's worth.
No, I know, but also because you have JVP, now your other matchups are getting like, because red isn't quite playable and people can't be wild slashing your JVPs, you're able to play these longer grindier games. And that's kind of what the forums become about. And then Jace is really good at discard spells and kill spells. So you kind of get a lot more value out of them while sculpting your hand at the JVPs. So I think Inverter is the best deck, not by a lot, just by a little bit, but it's so good at not being affected by hate and so adaptable that it becomes the best deck by a lot.
Sure.
And so I think it is irresponsible to play anything besides Dimir Inverter right now. Okay. Like assuming your sole goal is to win, there are other reasons and other goals out there, but like Banned Spirits is like kind of mediocre. It can beat stuff. The Mono White Devotion deck is like probably the second best hybrid deck, but it just like has the problem of you do have some cards that are really strong. We have other cards that aren't quite there. Sultai Delirium can be clunky at times. Mono Black Aggro is a trick. Mono Green Devotion I think is a trick. Lotus Breach just dies to hate. I have played against Lotus Breach actually a lot now with Dimir Inverter, and I just win every game 1. Like, you actually just have enough interaction, and because we moved away from sensors now, and some people, like, I've adapted extra thought erasures to my main deck, you just have more discard spells. So if your Lotus Breach opponent doesn't have, like, a crazy draw, all the Narsets and discard spells main deck actually make game 1, like, really reasonable.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then these other decks, just, like looking down the list here, the only deck I'm afraid of is Orzhov Auras, but, like, Is It in Soul isn't, like, close to good enough. Niv isn't close to good enough. Mono Red's a buy. The Golgari Stompy deck, I think, so there's this conception that Golgari Stompy is like the trick to beat Inverter, and that like going Elf into a 3-drop into like another 3-drop or a Coco is like how you're going to pressure Inverter and stop them. And I think like when you think about it, that makes a lot of sense, right? Like you just have the one fatal push, the 4 fatal pushes as a way to interact early, especially now with Sensor gone. So even if you're on the play, you can't like Sensor or Regisaur. But I think what happens is that most of the time they win game 1, and in game 2 they don't really improve. And the Dimir Inverter deck, as long as they don't over metagame for each other, just kind of crush it in the post board games. And as long as you have a 1-mana black spell in the early turns, you're probably going to win. Because if you fatal push the Elf on the first turn, you're going to have them be set back a lot because their deck is like 1-3-4 on the curve. And then if you Thoughtseize them, they probably don't have a lot of super high impact cards. And so if you can take like a Coco, you can probably have to figure out how to beat like a Steel Leaf Champion or a Regisaur. So
Right.
that's kind of where I'm at on Pioneer. I'm very much like pushing for Inverter. You should probably play it. That all being said, there's a BNR next Monday, and I feel like Dig Through Time's going to go. And when Dig Through Time goes, I think Inverter has to change a lot to stay a deck. So,
Right. Do you think it survives a banning of Dig Through Time?
I think the deck becomes, if you want to play just blue-black, it becomes like a tier 2 or 3 deck where you could play things like Tasigur and stuff of that kind of nature and become more of the mid-rangey deck game 1. At that point, though, I don't know if you're just kind of like a weaker Sultai Delirium, but you still have that combo aspect, which is kind of nice. So you also become kind of like a worse mono-white Devotion deck because Dig Through Time is your big draw over them because it lets you get either your combo if you need it really quick or your interactive pieces. But I think what happens is if you believe Inverter to be a fundamentally strong strategy and you believe the mid-range part of it to be strong, you can combine the Sultai Inverter deck that like Emma played at the PT Phoenix, and you make that your game plan, because right now it currently doesn't make sense to play that because Dig Through Time is so strong. But if you don't have that anymore, then it might just be right to play the Sultai cards and then boom, have this kind of combo aspect in your Sultai Delirium deck and just have a few less targets to traverse for. So
Right. I suspect that if they were going to ban Inverter, that they would want to do it in such a way that it would not still be a deck.
interesting. See, I think the Inverter is like not oppressively powerful if you can't always like have it so early, and Dig Through Time stops it from being so early.
I think that they are not that interested in having a bunch of turn 2 combos in Pioneer, but that's just a theory. That's just a theory. I don't really have a basis for that other than just that it doesn't seem like the kind of thing that's good for Pioneer.
You see, like, but
So I expect that I suspect that if they're going to make changes to Pioneer, it will probably be either Inverter or Thassa's Oracle and probably Heliod as well.
okay, I could see maybe Heliod going. I am also almost convinced that Breach is going to go.
Sure, I could believe that as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I also think it might go in Legacy, for what it's worth.
Oh, I think Breach is going to get banned in like every format but Standard, basically.
Right.
Even though I think the Modern deck, which we'll get to soon here, is probably not good enough. I think even though you can hate Lotus Breach, it kind of does a thing where it forces everyone to play these damping spheres, and that's not the most fun thing ever. And then when you play against that deck, it's so miserable because it does have a fail rate up to a certain point. So yeah,
Right.
I think it's on the chopping block. Yeah, unfortunate. I hate having to talk about these banning stuff during these metagame episodes, but hopefully in like 6 days we won't see anything. I guess before we go, the hot Pioneer question everyone always has is, do you think they're going to unban something this time? Because they said they'd unban stuff too.
I would be surprised, right? Because like basically we've only banned things in the last 6 months or whatever, and other than the fetch lands that started on the ban list.
Sure.
So I just don't think that there's a reason to take anything off at this point, right? Like everything that has been banned had pretty good justification.
Yeah, I agree. I also think if you miss and have to reban, that's so bad. Like,
I mean, it's not unprecedented, right? They did that with Grave Troll in Modern.
Yeah, I think that was. I don't think that's a great look, especially for how young the format is. I think when you have a couple years go by, you can kind of come to that conclusion and make that happen. But like, let's say you unban Oath of Nissa, right, which is the one everyone always talks about, and let's just assume that it is too good, right? Whether you believe that or not right now, just play along with me.
Right.
And then it's too good, and you have to reban it. It's like, okay, like, do my cards mean anything? Are they going to get unbanned, rebanned? Should I hold on to these cards that aren't worth anything? I don't know. I just feel, it feels like it's not super great to have that happen early in the format's life.
Yeah.
Also,
No,
it's just
I think that there's almost no incentive, right? Like, what is Oath of Nissa doing for the format that is good if it's not? I mean, I don't understand what the motivation to suddenly have Oath of Nissa in the format is.
yeah. I think people just like the idea of cards getting unbanned. I think
Sure.
that's just it's really cool when Stoneforge got unbanned. It's like, the example, but
Right.
I think that that in time we'll see something get unbanned in Pioneer, but 2022 type thing. Things
I
will
think
get
it'd be
stronger.
cool to see the fetch lands get unbanned in Pioneer. But
No, I do not care that our mana is bad. I think it's a feature, not a bug. I
Fair.
do not want fetch lands in Pioneer. I do not want good mana bases in Pioneer. Not like
I think it would be
insane
cool
mana
because
bases.
it would be something that would actually shake up the metagame. Like, I think unbanning Oath of Nissa just does nothing, probably. The most likely thing that happens is it does nothing. The other possibility is that there's suddenly some green deck that's busted again, and then everybody only gets to play that deck. Whereas fetch lands being unbanned would actually help every deck equally.
Well, if you just unban fetch lands and don't change anything, the Del spells all get banned pretty quickly.
Sure, yeah. Obviously, I think Treasure Cruise and Dig Through Time would need to go.
Yeah, and if you just did that, Inverter's the best deck again by so much.
Yeah, it's possible. I don't know. I think the format is so different; it'd be hard to predict.
Sure, that's reasonable.
Like, I mean, for all I know, Jeskai Ascendancy with Dig Through Time and Treasure Cruise would be the best deck.
Sure, that's fair. I mean, if you believe that you can play those cards.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, it was the best deck in Modern for a long time, right? And
Well,
I mean, obviously, we don't have a lot of the cantrips that we had in Modern at the time, but adding fetch lands certainly helps a lot with the delve spells.
I don't think it was actually the best deck. I think Todd Anderson and them did a great job hyping that deck up on Versus Live, and it spread really quick because it looked really strong. And the trick was that Blue Red Delver was actually the best deck, in Modern.
When Treasure Cruise was a card,
Yeah,
yes,
I'm talking about Treasure Cruise,
absolutely.
yeah.
This was just when only Dig Through Time was legal.
I don't think that was. I wasn't playing it super competitively back then, but that was not the vibe I had at all. And I don't.
You know what? They might have actually banned both of them at the same time in Modern.
Yeah, I know that in Legacy we had Dig Through
Yeah,
Time
in
for a
Legacy we
while.
had only Dig at one point. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
Modern they both got banned. But yeah, I agree. Blue Red Delver was the best deck when both of those were legal. What I should say is that Jeskai Ascendancy was a reasonable deck in a format where there was a deck as powerful as Blue Red Delver.
Sure.
I mean, Raptor played it at some event. He was the one that really popularized it.
Yeah, that's reasonable. All right, let's talk Modern. Modern regionals for SCG is this weekend. The format hasn't seen a whole lot of spotlight on it since the new Theros set came out. The top 5 decks, according to Goldfish, are Amulet Titan, Eldrazi Tron, Mono Red Blitz, Jund, and Dimir Urza. Wow, Eldrazi. Let's just talk about Eldrazi Tron real quick because it's back without Lattice. What do you think about that?
That surprises me quite a bit. I assume that it has to be just a super favorable metagame for Eldrazi Tron because
Yeah, I think that it's
I
good
mean,
against everything.
Chalice
but Amulet.
must just be great right now. That's where we're at.
Yeah, so I think some other decks that are pretty close to being good or are good are Dredge, Bant Snowblade, Heliod Combo, Tron Burn, actual Burn, not Prowess, and it's
Right.
Chalice is very good against Prowess, and I think E-Tron's good against a lot of those. I think E-Tron's still quite good against Urza, especially now they're back on Thopter, so having Carnage Creator is a lot stronger than when they had Oko, and I think you're like a Jund deck with more pound for pound stronger cards than Jund if they resolve, so...
Yeah, I mean, it kind of is that. You're less interactive than Jund is, obviously. Unless you're playing a matchup where your opponent has a lot of 1-drops that they need to resolve. In which case, you have infinite counterspells.
Yeah, that's true. Very true. I think Eldrazi Tron is an okay deck. Also, they have Once Upon a Time now in their deck, so they're consistently getting these, turn 2 and 3 Thought-Knot Seers and Reality Smashers, which I think is a big help for the deck and something it kind of has to do if it wants to compete with Amulet Titan. But I gotta say, I was a believer with Eldrazi Tron when we had Lattice. With it gone now and Amulet Titan being the de facto best deck, I have a really hard time registering Eldrazi Tron.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, Chalice for 0 can be good in the Amulet matchup. Certainly you're not boarding out your Chalices in that matchup. But
yeah, but still,
yeah, it's not one of the matches where Chalice is lights out, and so I don't think that this deck is good against Amulet.
Yeah, I think Amulet puts a lot of pressure on the format, and that's why we're seeing the decks succeed that are, is because Amulet's so good, and I think that Amulet asks not a whole lot of you now, and so it's going to be seeing more and more play by people that are wanting to spike a tournament. So I don't really want to talk about Amulet Titan. It's obviously great. I love Amulet Titan, and we could talk about it a bunch. But unless you have something to say, I want to talk about these other decks more. Are you cool with?
I mean, Amulet would be what I would play, but
Yeah.
yeah, we can move on from there.
Yeah, because I do think talking about these decks kind of informs also why I would also play Amulet, even if I didn't like even if I didn't like enjoy playing it, I would still play it right now.
Right.
Like the Mono Red Blitz deck.
I assumed that we would be on the same page in Modern, for what it's worth.
Yeah, I did too. Well, if you know Amulet's good, you know you're probably on my page. I'm willing to kind of play a worse deck to play Amulet sometimes, but now I don't even have to.
Right.
Mono Red Blitz, the Prowess deck, is so like reasonable right now, and it's fast, and it has a surprisingly good matchup against like Heliod combo, and it forces your opponent, puts them under the gun. Same with Amulet, puts them under the gun. But it has this like natural fail rate that like those kind of decks just have, and it doesn't mulligan particularly well, which is something I don't like in a Modern deck right now. I think right now in Modern, with Once Upon a Time in the London Mulligan, if your deck can't mulligan particularly well, I am not about it.
Even with light up the stages and all the one drops, you don't think it mulligans very well?
I think that it's like a critical mass deck, and while it doesn't mulligan terribly, it doesn't mulligan like as well as like a Once Upon a Time deck does. Like
Sure.
I think Etron mulliganing to Chalices and the Once Upon a Times and like turn 2 and 3 Thought Not Seers is much like better mulliganing than the Blitz deck does.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly don't want to play against Etron with this deck, but it is a deck that often, if your opponent can't interact with you, you're pretty far ahead.
Sure, but I think also if you look at the decks, except for Amulet Titan, the decks do interact with you, right? Like Dimir, Urza, Jund, Bant, Snowblade, Dredge even interacts with you a little bit. Blue Eye Control interact with you. The Burn deck is actually, I imagine, a surprisingly tough matchup since they have the interaction spells and things like Searing Blaze, I imagine, are Mirror Breakers. So
yeah,
like,
I would definitely not want to play against Burn with this deck.
yeah, so I think that like you are being interacted with a lot except for the actual best deck. And I think that that's a draw to the deck, and the deck still beats interaction to a certain point. But like when now all the other decks are these mid-range decks in the format, I just don't know if I can play it.
Yeah, I would not be sold on playing this deck if I thought that, less than 50% of the room was on Amulet.
Yeah. And spoilers, there will probably be not even close to that regardless of what you go to.
Yeah, it's going to be sub 10% almost definitely.
Yeah, we saw Amulet like destroy like SCG Richmond. It like did very well. Ultimately Urza won that one, but like it did very well. Then the Amulet Titan decks were like down the next week in another team tournament. And team tournaments traditionally get people to play decks that are the perceived best decks for their homies,
Mm-hmm.
And so like you normally see like the rich get richer type thing, and we saw it go down. And I think a lot of that is people don't want to play Amulet Titan. And so you're only going to see like the spiky spikes and people who like those kind of decks play it. And if that's the case, then you can't play a deck like Etron because eventually you're going to run into them at the top. If you're assuming your goal is to spike the tournament, and then you can't play things like Prowess because there's just not enough of them. Like you have to make it to the later rounds to get to them.
I mean, that being said, looking at our metagame breakdown, Etron does seem reasonable against every other deck other than Amulet, right? So
I agree. No. I think Etron's probably a way to get a pretty good finish.
it kind of looks like Amulet probably only has one Predator, though, as well, which is the Prowess deck. So
yeah.
I think that I'd be pretty happy to play any of these other matchups.
Yeah, that's true. What do you think about Jund right now? Kroxa, it won a classic.
Were people playing Kroxa and Jund?
Yeah, people are playing Kroxa and Jund.
Very nice. I don't know. It looks like the same pile of medium that it always looks like. Most of the time when I lose to Jund, and I don't think that I should, it's because Renin 6 is kind of broken.
Sure. Have you seen the... actually, I know you haven't. Have you seen Sam Black's Teamer pile?
I have not.
So it's like Uro, Bolts, Renin 6, Cryptic, Archmage's Charm, Mystic Sanctuary, Birds of Paradise, and some builds. And like that's kind of the deck.
Okay.
And so it's like a Teamer Jund deck that wins with Uro as its way to go long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that, some of it some of it just really illustrates that the cards don't matter, right? Like either mid range is a viable strategy in the format or it's not. You can debate on the whether Thought Seizes or Cryptics are better in the metagame, but realistically, you're just going to be trying to one for one your opponent until they run out of things.
Yeah, and I think Amulet Titan can fight through that kind of stuff, but is kind of susceptible to it, and that's why I think I would not play Jund. I would play Dimir Urza because it has both discard spells and counter spells and a combo and an unbeatable, like one of the strongest cards in Modern in its deck. And so if I was going to play a deck that was an Amulet Titan, I think I would play Dimir Urza, despite my teammates saying that I shouldn't, and they're like Harlan. And so
Sure.
It's like the Urza guy isn't saying that. I still think it's a totally like really powerful mid-range deck that has a lot going for it and a lot of interaction.
Yeah, I mean the combo finish definitely is the selling point for me if I were going to play the deck. I think as is, I don't know. I might have convinced myself to play Etron if I wasn't playing Amulet.
Sure.
Just because like Chalice is really good right now, and the Once Upon a Times help.
That's true.
So.
And I think ultimately the thing that would get me off Etron for what it's worth is that we are playing a Modern. And if you're specifically playing a Modern Regionals and you're hearing this and it's like 2 days before your event, you gotta remember that it's probably 8 or 9 rounds, and a lot of your opponents are gonna be playing random crazy decks.
Yeah,
in the
sure.
early rounds.
You're gonna be so bad against the homebrews. That's just definitely true.
Yeah, and so you need to have something inherently powerful. Etron does have those draws thanks to Once Upon a Time. That's kind of making up for the lattice, where that before you just lattice those decks and then figure out a way to win once they couldn't play spells.
Right.
But now you kind of Once Upon a Time nut draw them. So worse, but still an out. I don't know.
Etron is more of a prison deck than a mid-range deck, right? Like when we boil it down, so it makes sense that you wouldn't want to play in the most open meta games.
Yeah, I would say it leans prison or mid-range depending on the draw.
Yeah, I mean it's obviously both, right? But like it's more like a prison deck than Jund, obviously.
Sure.
But
all right.
Like between Karn being main deck Stony Silences, the Chalice of the Voids, and Karn additionally tutoring up like actually, prison lock pieces out of your sideboard, like Witchbane Orb and Grafdigger's Cage, Tormod's Crypt, whatever. Torpor Orb.
I got the last question for you. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
You're preparing for the metagame and you're not an Amulet deck. All right. How much Amulet hate are you giving it? Are you giving a lot of hate, a lot of respect to Amulet Titan, or are you gonna be like, listen, if the best players are on Amulet Titan or the people that have played Amulet Titan for a long time, it's just gonna be beats, and I'm gonna hope my game plan's good enough?
I would not pack that much Amulet hate. I just don't think that that's really a thing in Modern for the most part. Like the margins are just too tight, right, between the most played deck and the second most played deck for the most part. I mean, there are exceptions in Modern sometimes, but rarely. And I also think that attacking Amulet is just too difficult. Like there aren't like specific cards other than like Damping Sphere that are even good against them. So like, yeah, maybe I play some Damping Spheres, but I'm not like gonna try to go overboard with it.
Sure, you're not gonna play Damping Sphere and Ashiok and
right.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Awesome. I'm with you. I'm kind of like. I am, even though I said you're gonna have to beat them at the eventual point, I'm kind of like, well, I'm gonna make sure that I've got reasonable stuff that overlaps for these other decks, and when I eventually hit the Amulet player, I'm gonna hope that like I said, my game plan is good enough and I get there in this game.
Yeah, and sometimes they just mulligan to 4,
Yeah, sometimes they just mulligan, and sometimes they just have a slightly too slow of a draw for your deck, and so if your deck's like a really powerful Modern deck, then it can probably capitalize on that kind of slow draw. And so it's kind of where I'm at with everything.
Yep, makes sense to me.
Awesome. All right. Well, that's going to wrap it up for the show this week. If you enjoyed this show and you want to give back, you can go to patreon.com/ccmtg and look to see if there's a tier you like and something that maybe you want out of us as well. And then you can also, once again, go to our sponsor, Oasis Games. If you want to find Matt, you can go to Twitter @TheWitchKling. If you want to find me, you can go to Twitter and find Mason E. Clark or twitch.tv/TheMasonClark. Thank you all for coming, and we'll see you all next week.